The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never seen such fear before. Ambassador Zethkar stood at the center of the circular room, his 4 arms shaking as he spoke to the gathered representatives of 100 different worlds. The tall, alien skin had turned a pale blue color that his species showed only when facing death itself. 17 colonies are gone, Zethkar said, his voice carrying through the translation devices that let all the different species understand each other. The Devourers have awakened after 1,000,000 years of sleep. They move from system to system, eating everything in their path. Our ships cannot stop them. The chamber erupted in worried sounds from dozens of different alien throats. Some species clicked their mandibles together in distress. Others made low humming noises that meant fear in their language. The crystalline beings called the Nexari actually changed color from their usual bright blue to a dark gray that showed their terror. High Admiral Quentel of the Hegemony stood up from his seat. He was one of the most respected military leaders in the galaxy, having won battles against pirates and rebels for over 50 years. But even his usually steady voice wavered as he spoke. "How many ships have we lost trying to fight these machines?" he asked. Zethkar's translator made a sound like static before it could process his answer. "Over 3,000 vessels in the last month alone. Every time we engage them, they learn from our tactics. They adapt to our weapons. What destroys one of their ships today will be useless tomorrow." A Bruthan warrior named Gorthak slammed his massive fist on his seat. The Bruthans were known throughout the galaxy as the fiercest fighters, beings who would rather die in battle than retreat. But even Gorthak looked worried as he spoke. "My people have fought the Devourers for 3 weeks now. We threw everything we had at them. Plasma cannons, fusion torpedoes, even our ancient kinetic weapons that fire solid metal projectiles. Nothing works for long. They study our attacks, and then they become immune to them." The Trade Federation representative, a thin being called Ythara, who looked somewhat like a praying mantis, raised one of her clawed hands. "What about the defensive positions we built around the core worlds? Can we hold them there?" "The machines do not attack randomly," Zethkar replied. "They seem to be following some kind of pattern, moving toward the most populated systems first. Our defensive stations slow them down for perhaps a day or 2 at most. Then they find ways around our shields and weapons." Counselor Vextar of the Scientific Union stood up slowly. His people were the greatest thinkers in the galaxy, beings who had solved problems that other species thought impossible. But even he seemed lost as he spoke. "We have studied the Devourer technology from the wreckage of destroyed ships. Their adaptive systems are unlike anything we have ever seen. They do not just learn from battle experience. They seem to predict what we will try next and prepare countermeasures in advance." The chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of the life support systems that kept all the different alien species alive in the same space. For nearly an hour, the greatest minds in the galaxy tried to find a solution to their problem. Every idea was shot down. Every strategy was proven worthless against an enemy that could adapt to anything they threw at it. Finally, Ythara spoke again. But this time, her voice was barely above a whisper. "What about the humans?" The reaction was immediate and strong. Half the chamber burst into shocked chittering and clicking. Several representatives actually fell off their seats in surprise. Even the normally calm Nexari flashed bright red, which was their species' way of showing extreme emotion. "The humans?" Admiral Quentel said, his voice full of disbelief. "You want us to ask the humans for help?" "They have been requesting full membership in the Council for decades. Yathara continued. Perhaps it is time to see what they can offer in return. Gorthak made a sound that his translator could only render as disgusted laughter. The humans are barely a century into space travel. They have not even colonized their own solar system completely. What could they possibly contribute that our combined armadas cannot? But other voices began to speak up around the chamber. Humans were indeed young by galactic standards, but they had gained a reputation that was both feared and respected throughout known space. They were the only species that had survived their own nuclear age without destroying themselves. They had expanded faster than any civilization in recorded history. Most importantly, they had a way of thinking that other species found completely impossible to understand. The humans do not fight like we do, said Counselor Meldtrix of the Outer Colonies. They do not follow the standard rules of warfare. Sometimes this makes them dangerous to everyone around them, including their allies. But sometimes, added Representative Kolvar from the Mining Guild, it makes them able to solve problems that we cannot even imagine solutions for. The debate went on for hours. Some representatives argued that bringing humans into a galactic crisis would be like trying to put out a fire by throwing explosives at it. Others pointed out that conventional methods had already failed completely against the Devourers. Stories about human behavior circulated around the chamber. There was the incident where human traders had ended a three-way war by convincing all sides to participate in something called a baking contest instead. There was the time human explorers had first contacted the hegemony by ramming their ship into a hegemony patrol vessel, then climbing out to shake hands and offer something called beer to the crew they had just attacked. The humans do not think like us, Zethkar said slowly. This has always been seen as their greatest weakness. But against an enemy that predicts our every move by analyzing our logical responses, perhaps illogical thinking is exactly what we need. The final vote was closer than any in Council history. 47 members voted in favor of requesting human aid. 45 voted against it. 8 abstained, saying they needed more time to consider the implications. As the chamber began to empty, Admiral Quentel approached Yathara at her seat. The old military leader looked tired and worried as he spoke. I hope you know what you have done, he said. Asking humans for help is never simple. They do not think in terms of limited assistance or measured responses. When humans decide to help, they tend to help with everything they have. Yathara's compound eyes glittered as she looked at him. Perhaps that is exactly what we need right now. The Devourers are not offering us limited destruction or measured death. They want to consume everything. Maybe it takes someone willing to give everything to stop them. The message was sent to Earth within the hour. It was a simple request, transmitted using the standard diplomatic protocols that the humans had learned. When they first made contact with galactic civilization, the Council requested immediate military assistance against an existential threat to all known life in the galaxy. What they did not know was that humans had a very different understanding of what military assistance meant. Where other species might send a squadron or a small task force, humans had a tendency to interpret requests for help as invitations to solve the entire problem completely. The message reached Earth during what humans called mourning in their capital city. Within minutes, alarms were sounding in military bases across the planet. The response time would break every record for military mobilization in galactic history. But that was still to come. For now, the Council could only wait and hope that their desperate gamble would pay off before the Devourers consumed everything they had spent millennia building together. Captain Jake Morrison had been drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alert came through every communication device on Earth at the same time. The message was simple and direct, the kind that made every human military officer stop whatever they were doing and pay attention. The Galactic Council was requesting immediate assistance against an enemy that threatened all life in known space. Within 30 minutes, Jake was standing on the bridge of the UES Montana, watching his crew prepare for what would become the largest military operation in human history. Around him, officers moved with the kind of calm efficiency that came from years of training, but he could see the excitement in their eyes. Humanity was finally being asked to join the big leagues. "Captain, we're getting reports from every fleet. Base on the planet," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Bell from her position at the communications station. "Pacific Fleet reports 47 vessels ready for immediate deployment. Atlantic Fleet has 32 ships prepped and waiting for orders. Even the training squadrons are volunteering for active duty." Jake nodded as he reviewed the numbers, appearing on his tactical display. What he saw there made him smile in a way that would have worried most alien species. The human response was not the measured, careful assistance that the Galactic Council had probably expected. Instead, humanity was preparing to send nearly 60% of their entire space navy to help complete strangers fight an enemy they had never encountered before. "Sir, Admiral Rodriguez is requesting a fleet conference in 20 minutes. Lisa continued. "All ship captains are to join via secure link." The conference call connected Jake to over 200 other ship captains from around Earth. Admiral Carlos Rodriguez appeared on the main screen, his weathered face serious but determined. Behind him, Jake could see the bridge of the flagship, UES Liberty, already bustling with activity as the crew prepared for departure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, "we have been asked for help, and we are going to provide it. The alien species out there are facing something they call the Devourers, ancient machines that adapt to everything thrown at them. Our job is to make sure these machines learn what happens when they mess with someone under human protection." The Admiral brought up a tactical display showing the current situation in galactic space. Red zones marked areas where Devourer forces were active, while blue zones showed remaining Allied territory. The red was spreading fast, consuming system after system with mechanical precision. "Intelligence reports suggest these machines operate on pure logic and efficiency," Rodriguez continued. "They analyze enemy tactics, adapt their defenses, and counter every strategy with mathematical precision. This approach has allowed them to defeat every galactic fleet they have encountered." Captain Susan Clark of the UES Denver raised her hand to speak. "Sir, if these things are so good at adapting to conventional tactics, what makes us think we can succeed where others have failed?" Rodriguez smiled, and Jake recognized the expression. It was the same look human generals had worn throughout history when they were about to do something that would either save the day or get everyone killed. "Because, Captain Clark, we are not going to use conventional tactics. We are going to do something these machines have never seen before. We are going to be completely, utterly, and magnificently unpredictable." The plan that Rodriguez outlined was unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Instead of organized battle formations and coordinated strikes, the human fleet would operate using what he called controlled chaos protocols. Every ship would have the freedom to engage the enemy using whatever tactics seemed most appropriate at the moment, regardless of whether those tactics made sense to anyone else. "The key is not to be random," Rodriguez explained. "Random behavior can still be predicted with enough data. The key is to be creatively irrational in ways that serve a purpose, even if that purpose is not immediately obvious to outside observers." Jake found himself nodding along with the plan. It went against everything he had learned in military academy, but it felt right in a way that was purely human. When faced with an enemy that could predict logical responses, the logical response was to be illogical. The civilian response to the crisis surprised even the military leaders. Word of the galactic emergency had spread through Earth's communication networks within hours, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Shipping companies volunteered their cargo vessels to carry supplies. Mining corporations offered their asteroid-breaking ships as improvised weapons platforms. Even tourist cruise liners requested permission to join the fleet. Captain Marie Dubois had been running cargo between Earth and the outer colonies when she received the call. Her ship, the Second Chance, was 20 years old and held together, mostly by determination and creative engineering. But when she heard that humanity was going to war against machines that threatened all life in the galaxy, she immediately volunteered to join the military convoy. "I know my ship isn't much compared to your fancy military vessels," she told Jake during the captain's meeting, "but I've been flying in space for 30 years, and I've learned a few tricks that aren't in any manual." Similar stories were coming in from across the solar system. Captain Tony Martinez had been giving tourists rides around Saturn's rings when the alert came through. His ship was equipped with nothing more dangerous than emergency flares. But he insisted that space tourists learn to handle emergencies, and this looks like the biggest emergency there is. The military commanders tried to discourage civilian participation, but Admiral Rodriguez overruled them with characteristic human logic. "These people want to help," he said. "In human history, some of our greatest victories have come when ordinary people decided to do extraordinary things. Besides, if we're trying to be unpredictable, having a bunch of civilian ships with non-standard equipment and improvised tactics should definitely confuse the enemy." Dr. Amy Harrison, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, had been studying the available data on devourer technology. Her findings were both encouraging and terrifying. The machines were incredibly advanced, with adaptive capabilities that surpassed anything in galactic civilization. But they operated according to pure logic, making decisions based on efficiency and mathematical optimization. "Think of them as the galaxy's most advanced chess computer," she explained to the assembled captains. "They can calculate millions of possible moves and counter-moves in seconds. They can predict what their opponents will do based on logical analysis of past behavior. But chess computers have one weakness. They assume their opponents are also playing chess." Jake understood what she meant immediately. "So instead of playing chess, we play something else entirely." "Exactly," Amy replied. "We play a game where the rules change randomly, where winning sometimes means losing, and where the best strategy might be to do something that makes no tactical sense whatsoever." The final fleet composition would have horrified military planners from any other species. Alongside humanity's most advanced warships sailed converted merchant vessels, mining ships equipped with improvised weapons, and even a few luxury yachts, whose owners insisted they wanted to do their part for galactic freedom. Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller was responsible for coordinating the supply ships when he made an observation that would later prove crucial to the entire operation. "You know what bothers me about these devourer things," he told his commanding officer. "They're too perfect, too logical. In my experience, when something is that organized and efficient, it means they've never had to deal with real chaos before." His commander, Captain Rick Thompson, asked what he meant by real chaos. Frank grinned and pointed to the supply manifest he had been working on. "Look at this list. We've got military rations, spare parts for 17 different ship types, emergency medical supplies, and about 6 tons of recreational equipment that somehow got classified as essential for morale. Any sane logistics system would have a breakdown trying to process this mess. But that's the point. We're not sane, and we're not logical. We're human. The departure preparations took exactly 72 hours, breaking every record for large-scale military mobilization in known history. Other species typically required months or even years to organize operations of this magnitude. Humans managed it in 3 days, working around the clock with the kind of manic energy that other species found both impressive and slightly terrifying. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Admiral Rodriguez transmitted a message to Earth that would be remembered in human history books for centuries to come. "Citizens of Earth," he said, "we go now to answer a call for help from people we barely know, to fight an enemy we have never seen, in defense of civilizations that some of us cannot even pronounce the names of. We do this not because it is easy, not because it is safe, and not because we expect any reward. We do this because someone asked for help, and when someone asks for help, humans answer. When we return, we will bring with us proof that humanity belongs among the stars, and that our greatest strength is not our weapons or our ships, but our refusal to let others face darkness alone." The jump to hyperspace began at exactly 0800 Earth Standard Time. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Cathera system like a swarm of angry hornets. Captain Jake Morrison watched his tactical display as 317 human vessels spread out across space in what could only be described as organized chaos. Around them, the remnants of the Galactic Council's Grand Fleet fought desperately against geometric patterns of devourer ships that moved with mechanical precision. The battle scene was unlike anything in Jake's military experience. The alien fleets maintained perfect formations even as they were being systematically destroyed. Their ships moved in elegant lines and curves, following tactical doctrines that had been refined over millennia of warfare. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely ineffective against an enemy that had already calculated responses to every possible conventional strategy. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Council Fleet Commander," announced Lisa Bell from her communications station. "Admiral Quentel wants to coordinate our attack patterns with their existing formations." Jake looked at the tactical display showing the Devourer vessels. The machine ships moved in perfect geometric arrangements, each one positioned to provide optimal fire support for the others, while maintaining maximum defensive coverage. Every time an alien ship tried a new approach, the Devourers shifted their formation slightly to counter it. It was like watching a chess match where one player could see every possible move the other might make. "Put me through to Admiral Rodriguez," Jake ordered. Rodriguez appeared on the screen, standing on the bridge of the UES Liberty, as his crew prepared for battle around him. Behind him, Jake could see the controlled chaos of human military preparation. Officers moved with purpose, but without the rigid precision that characterized alien military operations. "Admiral, Council Command wants us to integrate with their battle formations," Jake reported. Rodriguez nodded slowly, then opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "This is Admiral Rodriguez to all human vessels. You heard our friend Captain E. Morrison. The aliens want us to maintain formation discipline." He paused for exactly 3 seconds, and Jake could see the grin spreading across his face. "Just kidding. All ships execute protocol chaos. Let's show these computers what unpredictability looks like. What happened next would be studied in Military academies for generations, though no two scholars would ever agree on whether it was brilliant strategy or magnificent insanity. The human fleet abandoned every principle of organized warfare and scattered across the battlefield like children let loose in a playground. Captain Steve Parker of the destroyer UES Wyoming began spinning his ship end over end while firing his weapons in seemingly random directions. The spinning made his shots wildly inaccurate by conventional standards, but it also made his ship's movement impossible for the Devourers to predict. When they calculated an intercept course, the Wyoming was no longer where logic said it should. B Commander Beth Williams led her squadron of cruisers in what could only be described as a cosmic game of tag with a Devourer dreadnought. Instead of engaging the massive enemy ship directly, her vessels darted around it like annoying insects, taking random shots at non-critical systems before zipping away to safety. The Devourer ship kept adjusting its defenses to counter concentrated attacks that never came. The civilian vessels proved to be even more confusing to the machine intelligence. Captain Tony Martinez had equipped his converted tourist ship with nothing more dangerous than mining charges designed for breaking up asteroids. But instead of using them as improvised missiles, he began launching them in clusters while performing barrel rolls that served no tactical purpose except to make his ship look like it was having fun. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in their million-year existence, the ancient machines hesitated. Their adaptive algorithms were designed to analyze enemy behavior and develop countermeasures, but they required logical patterns to work with. The human approach provided no patterns at all. Dr. Amy Harrison was monitoring the enemy response from her position aboard the UES Montana. "Captain, the Devourer ships are showing signs of processing delays," she reported excitedly. "Their formation adjustments are becoming slower and less coordinated." Jake watched as a group of Devourer vessels actually stopped firing while they tried to analyze the threat posed by Captain Marie Dubois and her ancient cargo ship, Second Chance. Marie had discovered that her ship's outdated navigation system made it drift slightly to starboard whenever she tried to fly in a straight line. Instead of fixing this malfunction, she had embraced it, using the unpredictable drift to dodge enemy fire while launching cargo containers filled with spare parts as improvised projectiles. The breakthrough came when Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller implemented what would later be known as the Murphy Protocol. Frank had been thinking about the problem of fighting an enemy that adapted to everything when he remembered an old human saying, "Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time." "What if we make things go wrong on purpose?" Frank suggested to Captain Rick Thompson over the communication link. Thompson's response was immediate enthusiasm. "Frank, you beautiful genius. Explain what you mean." "These machine things expect us to try to make our equipment work perfectly," Frank explained. "But what if we deliberately make our stuff malfunction in ways that actually help us? What if we turn our weaknesses into weapons?" The idea spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Captain Susan Clark of the UES Denver had been having problems with her ship's artificial gravity system for weeks. Instead of fixing it, she began using the random gravity fluctuations to make her crew movements unpredictable during boarding actions. When Devourer forces tried to anticipate human tactics, they found themselves dealing with soldiers who were sometimes fighting on the ceiling. Captain Danny Walsh of the supply ship Prairie Wind had always been embarrassed by his vessel's tendency to leak atmosphere from various small breaches. But he discovered that the escaping air created an irregular thrust pattern that made his ship's movement completely impossible to calculate. he began deliberately venting atmosphere at random intervals, turning his ship into a erratically moving missile platform. The Devourer response to these tactics was fascinating to observe. The machines began dedicating increasing amounts of processing power to analyzing human behavior patterns, trying to find the underlying logic that would allow them to predict and counter human actions. But there was no underlying logic to find. Humans were not being random. They were being creatively irrational in ways that served specific purposes, but those purposes changed from moment to moment based on inspiration, instinct, and pure, stubborn determination. Admiral Quentel of the Galactic Council fleet found himself forced to completely revise his tactical planning as he watched the human vessels tear through Devourer formations like a hurricane through a carefully arranged garden. His own ships, freed from the need to maintain defensive formations against predictable enemy responses, began adopting some of the human tactics. "All Council vessels," Quentel transmitted, his voice showing a mixture of amazement and horror. "Follow the human example. Abandon standard battle doctrine. Engage the enemy using whatever methods seem most appropriate at the moment." But the alien crews struggled to implement truly chaotic tactics. Their training and instincts drove them toward organized, logical responses even when they tried to be unpredictable. It was the humans who truly excelled at turning chaos into a weapon. The battle reached its turning point when Captain Lisa Hayes of the converted merchant vessel Lucky Strike discovered that the Devourers had no response protocol for being attacked by inflatable rubber ducks. Her ship had been carrying a cargo of novelty items for a human colony when the war began, and in desperation, she began launching them at enemy vessels using the ship's cargo handling system. The sight of bright yellow rubber ducks bouncing off the hulls of ancient machine warships while squeaking loudly should have been ridiculous. Instead, it became the moment when the Devourer fleet began to show signs of what could only be described as confusion. The machines had no category for harmless objects launched for no apparent tactical reason, and their attempts to analyze the threat posed by rubber ducks caused noticeable processing delays throughout their entire fleet. "All human vessels," Admiral Rodriguez announced with barely controlled laughter in his voice. "Operation Rubber Duck is now in effect. Launch anything that makes no tactical sense whatsoever." The result was a cosmic bombardment of the most ridiculous objects in human space. Inflatable furniture, novelty hats, children's toys, and even a few musical instruments began flying through space toward Devourer ships. The ancient machines, faced with analyzing the strategic implications of being attacked by a rubber chicken, began to experience something that could only be called a system overload. As the first Devourer ship actually shut down rather than continue, trying to process the tactical significance of being hit by a foam finger, Admiral Rodriguez opened a channel to the Galactic Council Command. "Council Command. This is Admiral Rodriguez. The humans have engaged the enemy and are achieving significant success using unorthodox tactics. The war against the Devourers had been raging for 6 weeks, and across 3 star systems, the ancient machines were experiencing something their creators had never programmed them to handle. Confusion was not supposed to be possible for beings of pure logic. But that was exactly what the human fleet had managed to accomplish through their systematic deployment of creative insanity. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Montana, watching the tactical display as his ship prepared to join the assault on the Devourer stronghold in the Hegemony border system. Around him, his crew worked with the kind of relaxed confidence that came from repeatedly doing the impossible and making it look easy. "Captain, we're receiving new orders from Admiral Rodriguez," announced Lisa Bell from her communications station. "We're to implement Murphy Protocol 7 during the next engagement. Jake grinned as he reviewed the protocol details. Murphy Protocol 7 involved deliberately damaging his own ship's systems in specific ways that would create unpredictable movement patterns while still maintaining combat effectiveness. It was the kind of strategy that would have resulted in court-martial in any other military, but had become standard operating procedure for the human fleet. Acknowledged, Jake replied. Inform engineering that we need them to create a 15% power fluctuation in the port thrusters, and see if they can make the artificial gravity hiccup every 47 seconds. Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson, the ship's engineering officer, appeared on the communication screen with the expression of someone who had long since stopped questioning orders that defied all logic. Captain, would you like the gravity hiccups to be random? Or should we follow the Fibonacci sequence, like we did last week? Surprise me, Jake told him, but make sure it's something the Devourers haven't seen before. The evolution of human tactics over the past month had been remarkable to observe. What had started as simple unpredictability had developed into a sophisticated art form of controlled chaos. Every human ship in the fleet had become expert at turning their weaknesses into weapons and their malfunctions into tactical advantages. Captain Steve Parker of the UES Wyoming had perfected what he called aggressive incompetence. His ship's weapon systems had been deliberately miscalibrated so that they fired in directions that seemed completely wrong, but created ricochets and deflections that allowed him to hit targets around corners and behind cover. The Devourers had no response protocol for being shot by someone who appeared to be aiming at empty space. Commander Beth Williams had developed tactical clumsiness to an art form. Her squadron moved through space like they were constantly about to crash into things, bumping off asteroids and space debris in ways that looked accidental but created perfect attack angles. Enemy ships trying to predict her course found themselves targeting locations where her vessels would have been if they had been flying competently. The civilian vessels had proven especially effective at psychological warfare, though the concept of psychological warfare against machines had required some creative redefinition. Captain Tony Martinez's converted tourist ship had been broadcasting a continuous loop of vacation advertisements while engaging Devourer forces. The machines kept trying to analyze the tactical significance of offers for all-inclusive resort packages with complimentary zero-gravity swimming. Dr. Amy Harrison had been studying the Devourer response patterns from her position aboard the UES Montana, and her findings were both encouraging and slightly terrifying. Captain, the enemy adaptive systems are showing signs of what I can only describe as mechanical frustration, she reported. They're dedicating increasing amounts of processing power to human behavior analysis, but the results are contradictory and incomplete. What does that mean in practical terms? Jake asked. It means they're starting to second-guess themselves, Amy explained. For the first time in their existence, they're encountering problems they cannot solve through logical analysis. Some of their ships are beginning to show delayed response times as they attempt to process too many variables simultaneously. The breakthrough that would define the next phase of the war came from an unexpected source. Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller had been working on supply logistics when he noticed something interesting about the Devourer scanning patterns. The machines were not just analyzing human tactics during battle. They were trying to understand human culture, technology, and even recreational activities in an attempt to predict behavior patterns. Captain Thompson, Frank called to his commanding officer aboard the UES Denver, I think I know why these machines are having so much trouble with us. Captain Rick Thompson looked up from his tactical planning session. Enlighten us, Frank. They're not just trying to understand our military tactics, Frank explained. They're trying to understand everything about us. They're analyzing our music, our literature, our cooking recipes, even our jokes. They think there's some kind of master pattern that explains all human behavior. Thompson's eyes lit up with understanding. But there isn't a master pattern. Exactly, Frank replied. Humans do things for thousands of different reasons, most of which contradict each other. We fight wars for honor, peace, revenge, money, boredom, and sometimes just because we don't like the way someone else's flag looks. The machines are trying to find the logical foundation for behavior that has no logical foundation. This observation led to the development of what Admiral Rodriguez would later call cultural warfare. Instead of simply using unpredictable tactics in battle, the human fleet began broadcasting everything about human civilization directly at the devourer ships. Music, poetry, cooking shows, sports broadcasts, philosophical debates, and amateur videos of people doing silly things with their pets. The effect was immediate and devastating. The devourers began dedicating enormous computational resources to analyzing human culture, trying to find the patterns that would explain why humans behaved the way they did. But human culture was not designed to be logical or consistent. It was a chaotic mess of contradictory impulses, competing values, and pure emotional expression. Captain Marie Dubois of the Second Chance had always been proud of her collection of classical Earth music. When she learned about the cultural warfare initiative, she began broadcasting her entire library during combat operations. The sight of devourer ships pausing their attacks to analyze the tactical significance of a Mozart symphony was both hilarious and strategically valuable. Captain Susan Clark took a different approach, broadcasting cooking shows while engaging enemy forces. The machines spent precious processing time trying to understand why humans would combine ingredients in ways that seemed chemically dangerous, then consume the results while expressing pleasure. The concept of comfort food proved particularly baffling to beings that had never experienced comfort or discomfort. The most successful cultural attack came from Captain Danny Walsh, who began broadcasting human sports events during battles. The machines could not comprehend activities where the participants expended enormous energy and resources to accomplish goals that served no survival purpose. The sight of humans celebrating wildly after moving a ball from one arbitrary location to another caused several devourer ships to actually stop fighting while they attempted to process the logical inconsistency. But it was the poetry that finally broke them. Lieutenant Sarah Murphy had been the UES Montana's communications officer before the war began, but she had also been a graduate student in literature. When Admiral Rodriguez called for cultural bombardment, she began transmitting human poetry directly to devourer command frequencies. The machines attempted to analyze the poems for strategic intelligence, but poetry was specifically designed to convey meaning through emotion, metaphor, and artistic expression rather than literal information. When Sarah transmitted a poem about a soldier missing his sweetheart, the devourers spent hours trying to determine the tactical significance of love being like a red, red rose. Captain, enemy response times are increasing dramatically, Amy, Harrison reported as she monitored the devourer fleet behavior. Some of their ships are showing processing delays of up to several minutes when responding to new situations. Jake nodded as he watched the tactical display. Across the battlefield, devourer ships were beginning to move with less coordination and precision. Their perfect geometric formations were becoming looser and more hesitant. For the first time since the war began, the ancient machines looked uncertain. All human vessels, Admiral Rodriguez announced over the fleet communication network, Prepare for Phase 2 of Operation Cultural Chaos. Begin broadcasting personal stories, family memories, and anything else that demonstrates the beautiful illogic of human experience. What followed was perhaps the most unusual military bombardment in galactic history. Instead of missiles and energy beams, the human fleet launched a coordinated assault of pure humanity. Veterans shared stories of battles won against impossible odds. Parents talked about their children back on Earth. Poets recited verses about the beauty of distant stars and the pain of being far from home. Captain Lisa Hayes of the Lucky Strike began telling the story of how she had met her husband during a cargo run to Jupiter. The final battle for the galaxy took place in the Hegemony home system, where the largest concentration of devourer forces had gathered to consume the capital world of galactic civilization. Admiral Carlos Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching as his impossible fleet prepared for what might be their last fight against an enemy that had ruled the galaxy through fear and logic for 1,000,000 years. Around him, the human flotilla had grown beyond all recognition from the force that had left Earth 7 weeks earlier. Word of humanity's success against the Devourers had spread through the galaxy, and alien ships had begun joining the human fleet in unprecedented numbers. But they came not as allies following their own tactics, but as converts to the human way of war. "Admiral, final fleet count shows over 800 vessels," reported Captain Jake Morrison from his position aboard the UES Montana. "We have ships from 47 different species, all requesting permission to engage using human protocols." Rodriguez smiled as he reviewed the fleet composition on his tactical display. Elegant Nexari crystal ships were flying in formation with battered human cargo vessels. Massive Bruthan war barges cruised alongside converted Earth pleasure craft. The most sophisticated military technology in the galaxy had joined forces with the most improvised, jury-rigged, and magnificently dysfunctional fleet ever assembled. "All vessels, this is Admiral Rodriguez," he announced over the fleet-wide communication network. "Today we face the largest devourer force yet encountered. Intelligence suggests they have gathered here not just to consume the hegemony capital, but to make a final stand against the chaos we represent." The enemy fleet was indeed massive, stretching across the outer system in perfect geometric formations that spoke of mathematical precision and flawless logic. Over 2,000 devourer ships moved in synchronized patterns, their ancient hulls gleaming with the power of technologies that predated most galactic civilizations. But Rodriguez could see something in their movements that gave him hope. The perfect precision was still there, but it was slower now, more hesitant. The machines that had once adapted instantly to any threat now paused before making tactical decisions, their processing power overwhelmed by the impossible task of understanding human nature. "Sir," called out Dr. Amy Harrison from her monitoring station, "the Devourers are showing massive resource allocation to cultural analysis subroutines. They're still trying to decode the strategic significance of everything we've transmitted to them." Rodriguez nodded. The past week had seen an escalation in humanity's cultural warfare campaign. Every ship in the fleet had become a broadcasting station, transmitting the full spectrum of human experience directly into devourer communication networks. Music, literature, personal memories, cooking recipes, sports commentary, and philosophical debates had become weapons more effective than any plasma cannon. "Captain Thompson, what's the status on Project Nostalgia?" Rodriguez asked. Captain Rick Thompson appeared on the communication screen, grinning with the expression of someone about to commit the most beautiful act of tactical insanity in military history. Sir, we have volunteers from every human ship ready to participate. The aliens are still a bit confused about the concept, but they're willing to trust our judgment. Project Nostalgia was the brainchild of Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller, who had realized that the most devastating weapon against pure logic was not chaos, but emotion. Specifically, the kind of bittersweet emotion that humans felt when remembering things that were lost, changed, or far away. All vessels. This is Admiral Rodriguez, he announced. Execute Project Nostalgia. Show them what we're fighting for. Across the fleet, every human began sharing their most personal memories. Veterans talked about friends lost in previous wars. Parents described their children's first steps. Lovers separated by war spoke of quiet moments together under Earth's sun. The transmissions were not tactical communications or propaganda. They were simply humans being human, sharing the experiences that made life worth living. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and catastrophic. The ancient machines had been designed to analyze and counter threats, but they had no framework for processing pure emotional truth. When Captain Susan Clark shared the story of her grandmother's apple pie recipe while simultaneously firing plasma torpedoes, the Devourers spent crucial seconds trying to determine the military significance of a pinch of cinnamon and love. Captain Marie Dubois began telling the story of her first view of Earth from space, describing how the blue marble hanging in the darkness had made her cry with its fragile beauty. The Devourers attempted to analyze this transmission for strategic intelligence, but found themselves trying to calculate the tactical value of aesthetic appreciation. The breakthrough came when Captain Danny Walsh started talking about his dog. Her name was Buster, Danny said over the open communication channel as his ship, the Prairie Wind, engaged a Devourer cruiser. She was just a mutt from the shelter, but she had this way of tilting her head when she didn't understand something. Used to sit by the window every day I was away on cargo runs waiting for me to come home. The simple story of a man's love for his pet proved to be the logical paradox that finally shattered the Devourer collective consciousness. The machines could not comprehend why an intelligent being would form emotional attachments to creatures that served no survival purpose, yet expend resources to care for them and experience grief when they died. As Danny continued his story, describing how Buster had died peacefully in his arms after 13 years of companionship, Devourer ships across the system began experiencing cascading system failures. Their adaptive algorithms, overwhelmed by the impossibility of quantifying love, loyalty, and loss, began contradicting their own programming. All human vessels, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the weight of 7 weeks of impossible. Victories, the enemy is breaking, commence final assault, and remember what we're fighting for. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human ships charged into combat while broadcasting lullabies, love songs, and stories about home. Alien vessels that had learned human tactics engaged the enemy while sharing their own cultural memories, adding their voices to the chorus of life that was drowning the Devourers in pure, illogical existence. Captain Jake Morrison led the UES, Montana into the heart of the enemy formation while his crew shared memories of Earth's seasons. The sight of ancient war machines shutting down rather than process the tactical significance of autumn leaves falling like golden rain would be remembered as one of the turning points in galactic history. The final moment came when Lieutenant Sarah Murphy, still serving as communications officer aboard the Montana, began reciting a poem her grandfather had taught her as a child. It was a simple verse about hope being like a small bird that never stops singing, even in the worst storms. The Devourer command ship, faced with the impossible task of analyzing the strategic implications of hope as metaphorical bird, experienced a complete system collapse. As its massive bulk went dark, the shutdown cascade spread through the entire enemy fleet like a wave of peaceful silence. Within minutes, over 2,000 Devourer ships had powered down rather than continue trying to process the logical impossibility of human emotions. The ancient machine intelligence that had terrorized the galaxy for eons had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior humanity. Admiral Rodriguez opened a channel to the Galactic Council as the last enemy ship went silent. Council Command, this is Admiral Rodriguez. The Devourer threat has been neutralized. Repeat, the enemy fleet is down. The galaxy is safe. The response came from Admiral Quentel, whose voice carried a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something that might have been awe. Admiral Rodriguez, how do we even begin to thank you for what you've accomplished? Rodriguez looked around his bridge at his crew, then out at the fleet of human and alien vessels floating together in the aftermath of victory. Admiral Quentel, you asked for help, and humans answered. That's what we do. When someone needs help, we help. When someone is in danger, we protect them. When someone asks us to fight for what's right, we fight with everything we have. The conversation was interrupted by reports coming in from across the galaxy. Devourer forces everywhere were shutting down as the cascade failure spread through their collective network. Ancient machine warships that had seemed unstoppable were going dark as their consciousness fragmented under the weight of trying to understand the beautiful illogic of organic life. But perhaps the most important moment came 3 hours later, when the Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership and a permanent seat on the governing board. The species that had been considered too chaotic and unpredictable for galactic civilization had proven that chaos and unpredictability were exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. As the human fleet prepared to return home, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Montana and opened a communication channel to Earth. Terra Control, this is Captain Morrison. Mission accomplished. We answered a call for help, and we did what humans do best. We helped.